Hollow Knight is not an easy game. Going through the game casually, many struggle with a number of bosses, tough platforming sections, and difficult moral decisions. So it comes as no surprise that speedruns of the game are even harder. Speedruns of Hollow Knight involve crystal dashing pixels above acid, fighting bosses with little to no upgrades, and completing some of the most difficult challenges quickly and often while taking double damage. But out of every Hollow Knight speedrun out there, which one is the absolute hardest one? To figure this out, we first need to talk about the different ways you can run the game, better known as categories. The most popular universal speedrun categories are any percent and 100%. In any percent, you complete the game as fast as possible, with no additional requirements or completion. In 100%, you must complete the game after collecting every item and collectible. I should mention, for all the Hollow Knight runs I talk about today, I'll be referring to the no major glitches version of the run. This is because it's the much more popular way to run the game, and it's also what I'm familiar with. In Hollow Knight any percent, you must fight bosses such as the Watcher Knights and the Hollow Knight, with base unupgraded nail, Vengeful Spirit as your only spell, and Shaman Stone as your one charm. Additionally, there are many difficult tricks, such as the infamous Queen's Garden acid skip. In its full completion category, 112, you are faced with one of the hardest challenges Hollow Knight has to offer, the Pantheon of Hollow Nest. This is a boss rush gauntlet of every single boss you've fought throughout the game in a row, with a much harder version of the true final boss at the end. You must complete this after a 3-hour gauntlet of completing the main game and collecting every charm and upgrade. This run also features challenges such as Isma's Tear Skip and Joni's Blessing without the lantern. But neither of these runs are really in contention for the hardest run. That's because Hollow Knight also has true ending and low percent. In speedrunning terms, true ending refers to the normal Radiance ending. This is mostly because the name was decided before the Godmaster DLC released. Either way, this run involves fighting a wide array of bosses without ever upgrading your nail, and only using Shade Soul and Shaman Stone. This list includes Failed Champion, Traitor Lord, and the Radiance herself. While you don't have to deal with the Pantheons, the difficulty of late-game bosses with very little upgrades is arguably worse. While low percent doesn't have to deal with Radiance, it more than makes up for it with its other challenges. Low percent refers to the lowest completion percent that you can complete the game with. This means that items that help make any percent faster and easier, such as Shaman Stone and Dash, are not allowed to be picked up. In Hollow Knight, this results in a large amount of Dark Deepness travel, dashless movement, and even harder versions of the bosses from any percent. While you could make some arguments for these two categories, I don't think they stand a chance against the true hardest full game category. This is Godhome ending. This category brings us back to the gauntlet of Pantheon of Hollow Nest, but this time, you don't have the luxury of getting every upgrade. In fact, if you want to compete with top times, you're going to have to skip out on the majority of charms in the game, pure nail, and pretty much any health upgrades. Additionally, you must also fight all the bosses in the overworld, performing difficult skips along the way. This run would optimally use even less equipment than the current world record, raising the difficulty even further. So surely this is the hardest Hollow Knight run, right? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We haven't even talked about individual level runs. Individual levels, or ILs, involve running only a secluded part of the run, such as the trial in the Colosseum or an individual Pantheon. One of the most difficult ILs includes Path of Pain, a run that, while only being a couple minutes long, requires insane precision and mastery of movement. I think most would agree, however, but the hardest IL run would have to be Pantheon of Hollow Nest with all bindings. Bindings are a mechanic in Hollow Knight that greatly increase the difficulty of the Pantheon boss rush. You can choose to greatly reduce your nail damage, unequip all charms, nerf your soul bar to 1 cast of a spell, or reduce your HP to 4 masks, less than your HP at the start of the game. Or you can do all of them at once. Completing Pantheon of Hollow Nest with all bindings is a great feat for any player. The majority of speedrunners in the community have not finished it a single time, and while the cause for many may be tedium, I think it still says a lot about its pure difficulty. It's hard enough to complete this challenge playing safe, but runners of this insane category must be constantly on the offensive if they want to compete with top times. This leaderboard is highly dominated by the Chinese speedrunning community, and I'd highly recommend checking out the runs due to how impressive they are. So it seems we have our answer, right? The hardest full game category of Hollow Knight is Godhome ending, and the hardest individual level run is all bindings Pantheon 5. But what if I told you there was a theoretical category that would make these two runs look like a walk in the park? A category that combines the most difficult part of these runs and makes them even harder. Let's talk about Hungry Knight. Okay, no, let's talk about low percent Godhome ending. As mentioned earlier, the goal of any low percent run is to complete the game with as little completion as possible. In addition to normal low percent, you can also complete specific endings with as little completion as possible, such as with low percent true ending, which we'll just avoid talking about for this video. Low percent Godhome ending gets 47%, many of which is either the bosses required to unlock the Pantheons, or the movement needed to get to them. Luckily, no essence grinding is required, due to you needing to defeat the Dream Warriors and normal bosses anyways. Much like in the Godhome ending run, you start out by defeating all the bosses in the overworld required to unlock the Pantheons. The difference here is that any upgrades that are used to increase damage must not be collected in order to maintain the low percent requirement. Therefore, the only spells you will have are unupgraded Vengeful Spirit to get into Green Path, and unupgraded Desolate Dive to get to Godhome. Your only charms will be Dream Wielder, as you pick it up on the way to Awoken Dreamnail, Grim Childs, as you must defeat Troop Master Grim to unlock Pantheon 3, and Void Heart. This is still not the biggest downgrade from regular Godhome ending, however. Getting nail upgrades is generally quick and well worth it for time save, so we would normally get the second best nail, which deals 17 damage, along with Fragile Strength for the Pantheons, raising it to 26 damage. Nail upgrades are percents, however, so in low percent, you'll have to skip all of them, leaving us at 5 nail damage for the Pantheons. Remember when I mentioned the nail binding earlier? The one that greatly reduced your nail damage for all bindings runs? The binding that has one of the biggest impacts on why all bindings is so difficult reduces your nail to 13 damage. Low percent Godhome is the hardest Hollow Knight run conceivable. You have all the difficult parts of the regular Godhome ending run, and after a long and difficult run around the map, you're faced with every Pantheon back to back, with worse equipment than all bindings. The only saving graces here are that you have 5 HP instead of 4, a full soul bar, and have Grimchild and Dreamwielder for some extra damage. Regardless, this run is so insanely difficult that nobody would actually attempt this ever. Right? Well, as it turns out, in the process of working on this video, someone not only attempted this run, but succeeded in completing a single segment speedrun. That person was General Milky. Milky starts by gathering all the required abilities and boss kills required for the run. Even during this section, there's a lot of difficult bosses due to having such low damage, and some difficult skips to avoid picking up Isma's tier. At around 2 hours and 30 minutes, Milky Dreamnails the Godseeker to get into Godhome, and now the run really begins. Because the low percent equipment isn't hard enough for them, Milky also selects every binding for the first Pantheon. Well, Actually, this is a good strategy for the run. You see, when you complete a total of 8 bindings throughout any of the pantheons, you unlock 3 lifeblood hearts to the left of every bench in every pantheon. This helps with the later pantheons, but the problem is, now the early pantheons are even more difficult and very long. Milky chose to get 4 bindings in Pantheon 1, and then 2 in both 2 and 3. Luckily, the punishment from these bindings is a little less harsh when you have such low equipment. Milky finally reaches the entrance to the final challenge, Pantheon of Hollow Nest, at 4 hours and 10 minutes. Along with Grimchild and their 5 damage nail, the hardest challenge of the run begins. Now you may think the hardest bosses will be towards the end, but you would be wrong. There's one boss that is made exponentially harder the lower your nail damage is. I'm of course talking about Collector. Getting rid of the smaller enemies in this fight gets ridiculous when you need 4+ nail hits to get rid of them. Milky mostly relies on the Dreamwielder's quick soul gathering to eventually spirit the enemies, killing them quicker. Regardless, this boss is so ridiculously hard that it's not much of a surprise that disaster struck this run, almost 5 hours in. Milky was not deterred, however. The first try collector was not required to be the first person to finish a run. Any try collector would do. And so, they got back up and gave it another shot. The rest of the run was nothing easy, but technically the hardest part was over with. Boss after boss fell as Milky managed to avoid death, and eventually, only one boss stood in place of this insane challenge being complete for the first time. After countless hours of practice, and 6 hours and 38 minutes of some of the most difficult Hollow Knight gameplay imaginable, Milky became the first person to ever complete a run of low % Godhome ending. Undoubtedly, the hardest speedrun in Hollow Knight. This was honestly the last thing I was expecting when I had the idea for this video. As it turns out, Milky was in the process of grinding away at training and doing attempts of this insane challenge. This is, in my opinion, the most impressive thing anyone has done in this game. I think this stands as proof that, no matter how great the challenge, someone will be crazy enough to attempt it. The Hollow Knight and speedrunning community as a whole won't back down as long as said thing is technically possible. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it interested you in Hollow Knight speedruns a bit. Be sure to check out the runs for yourself if they sound interesting. I'll link Milky's run as well as some other impressive runs I talked about in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully see you some other time.